So, Giles, first off, congratulations on receiving the Tipperary International Peace Award. It's an award that recognises your work as both a photographer and a humanitarian. I'd like to go back, though, to kind of where it all began with your godfather passing away and gifting you two gifts. One being the Olympus OM10 camera, and the second one being the Don McCullen's book, the famous British war journalist. I want to start with your influences. What was it about McCullen's photography that really influenced you and kind of captured your imagination in those formative years?
I think I'd never really seen images like his. I grew up, my parents weren't that interested in the arts or media. I'd never gone to galleries. And so suddenly seeing these really stark black and white images that made me feel so much emotion. I don't think I'd ever thought of photographs as having that impact. I'm dyslexic. I'd always struggled in school. I was held back a year at one point when I'm like 12 years old. School had been a real struggle for me. Nobody had diagnosed or spotted that I was dyslexic. And so I just always thought that I just wasn't able to communicate in the way that I wanted to. Suddenly, seeing these photographs, I was kind of seeing a different language. And I realized that, yes, the verbal language, the written word is one form, but visual storytelling was something that really worked for me.
I want to kind of jump ahead then. So kind of after leaving the kind of music industry and being a music photographer, you spent 2 years working with a young autistic man. This was ostensibly your first kind of photojournalist piece of work, working as a social worker for this man for 2 years, but also photographing his self-injurious behaviour. I suppose, how did that early experience, I suppose, shape you as a storyteller?
Yeah, it was really transformative for me because I left like the music and what I always call the rock and roll years, moved down to Hastings where I still live, and got a job in a bar, in a pub, old pub, and kind of was very lost. Really didn't know where I was going with my life. I'm in my early 30s. I thought I'd messed everything up in life, made terrible mistakes with everything. Really was in a dark place. And Nick, who is the young man you're referencing, his parents were kind of in the pub one day, and they basically had full-time carers for him. But they thought because he loved music, he might like to just spend a few hours with me, once a week, just talking about music or something that he'd find really interesting. And so I started doing that, and very quickly I became his full-time carer. And he's most of the time non-verbal, so he'd find it very difficult to express when the healthcare professionals were there talking about his issues. He would often self-harm when he became very frustrated, and you couldn't really stop him. He would punch himself, but they kind of didn't really take on how bad it was. And so with his family, with Nick, we thought, well, maybe by making photographs and documenting his life, we could show that to people. And it was very much a two-way thing where, I'd make photographs and Nick would look at them and help me with the edit, and we would choose the photographs that he thought represented him best and the ones that he liked. And then showing those to the healthcare professionals, you could see the impact it had on them, because suddenly being faced with, there was one photograph in particular where sort of blood on his face, and they were really like, oh my God, we've got to do something. And that was kind of the eureka moment where I'm like, wow, this is what photography can do, more than just, making a rock star famous. I could actually be an advocate for someone. A lot of people use this expression about giving voice to the others. I don't give anybody a voice. They all have voices, and it's really important that my job is simply to amplify those voices.
Photography is often described as a record of reality, yet every image is the result of choices, where to stand, what to frame, and I suppose when to press the shutter. I suppose, what does truth in photography mean to you?
Yeah, good question. Because I say there is no truth in photography, which kind of makes some people go, oh, well, you can't say that. There's a lot of truth. What I would say is there's no truth, but there is honesty. Pretty much what you just said is that if I made a photograph of you right now, that's a fraction of a second of your life with me choosing which direction I point that camera. So I've made a lot of assumptions, a lot of decisions. You don't know if there's somebody behind me as the photographer, either dressed as a clown or pointing a gun. I mean, you have no idea of what's going on in context. But what I would say is there can be honesty from a photographer. And honesty is them trying to say, this is what I believe is happening here. This is what I believe is important. And I want to show that with you. But we always have to understand that's what it is. It's somebody's opinion. It's somebody's view. It's me saying, this is how I see the world through my eyes. But it's not the truth.
So I want to talk about your work then. From Bangladesh to Ukraine, from Rwanda to South Sudan, you've witnessed communities enduring unimaginable hardship. I suppose across all those conflicts, what has surprised you the most about the resilience of the people that you've met?
When I didn't really understand that, I think when I started, I'd meet people in these very difficult circumstances. And I think I always wanted to show them, I had a kind of unconscious bias, as we call it, where I wanted to show them looking sad and looking in pain or looking very whatever it is, but something that was deep and serious. What I started to realize is actually what I tended to find when I spent time with communities was laughter, was kids playing, was families sharing a meal, talking about other things, couples in love, holding hands. And actually that was what I found was love, which sounds like a very cliched thing to say, but in the midst of war, I found the greatest stories of love that I could imagine.
I'm just on that subject then. So, having spent so much time with people forced to flee their homes, what goes through your mind when you see the way refugees are often viewed or spoken about in Western countries?
I always say that I document the reason why those people have run. I document why those people have fled. And I understand, we live in a time when people are finding their own economic position very difficult, where we have a very unstable political landscape across Europe. And so it's very easy to pick on one group of people and blame them for all the issues. I, as I say, have documented people fleeing conflict. Where do I find most of those people? I actually find them living very close to the countries. For example, you go to Lebanon, there's 1.2 million Syrian refugees living in a country of 4 million people. You know, the choice to try and come to Europe is often people's very last choice. It's a sense of desperation. People I've met have never wanted to leave their homelands, but I've been on those places and I have seen the hell that people have had to live in, whether it be in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, South Sudan, DR Congo, so many places. The problem is that people have tried to create a divide. They've tried to create anger. Our job as storytellers is to make that connect. So it's my job to make sure that my stories about people fleeing war, refugees, those forced from their homelands, that we see them in the same way you would if you saw them right in front of you in a burning house. And so rather than see, again, a lot of people blame either the person on the street for having no compassion or the person in the house for being a threat. I say, I'm the storyteller. The problem is mine. I have to get better at making people see that human connection because I believe most people in their hearts would never want to see somebody else suffer.
Before your injuries in 2011, you documented the impact of war on other people's lives. Afterwards, you experienced the reality for yourself. I suppose, how has that experience changed the way you approach your work?
First off, it meant actually that on a very personal, selfish level, that I felt less guilt about my work because that was always one of the biggest challenges. You go to somewhere, you see people in their worst moments, even if you think you're there for all the right reasons to tell their stories, to make sure the world sees it, there's a sense of guilt that here I am. I come from a very privileged position. I'm seeing you in your worst moment. I'm making a photograph. I'm writing down your interview and then I'm leaving and going back home. And I always felt a sense of, yeah, of guilt. I think when I got injured, I could see how that relationship then changed with the people I documented because they could see that I'd had my own pain and suffering that I'd gone through and I'd now chosen to come back and share that stories. So for me, that was the gift that I was given from what happened, was that my connection would be completely different with the people I documented, that they would see not so much the missing limbs or scars, but actually see the suffering and that resilience that comes at the end of that. And that gave me a connection that would be completely unique. So that's really what changed. I remember when I was going back to work, so it was 18 months after my injury, I went back to Afghanistan and I thought, it's going to be harder for me. I don't have all the angles that other photographers use. I can't move as fast. Am I just trying to do this just to prove that I can do it, which is not the right thing to do? But in the end, I thought, no, the insight that I have, the connection I have, will make me a greater storyteller. And that is the biggest thing that changed, is that I saw things in a way, a different perspective. And the other thing it did is it led me to setting up my own organization because I realized I'd sort of the years of working with NGOs and charities and the UN, everybody always talked about empowering people. So they would say, we empower children in Rwanda, we empower women that have gone through sexual violence, we empower this, we empower that. I learned during my own recovery that nobody could empower me, that we can't empower anyone else. On the days when my stumps of my legs were bruised, bleeding, I had to put my prosthetics on, try and walk again, I'd fall, hurt myself. Nobody could empower me to do that. That had to come from deep within me. What I did have, though, was the greatest facilitators and supporters that anybody could have. The doctors, the nurses, the medics, the physios, occupational therapists, all those people. They were there and my family to support me through that journey. But the empowerment came from within. And I realized that's what I wanted to do for others, that I realized we couldn't set up an organization where you say we're empowering others. Instead, to look at it and say, what are the barriers stopping you empowering yourself? What is the challenge that means you can't become the person that you want to become or have the potential to be? And so we then set out to break down those barriers. So that also changed my storytelling, because I realized my focus now was not so much on the person, but on the barrier that was stopping them achieving their goals.
You've reported on conflicts that rarely dominate the headlines in the West. Why do you think certain humanitarian crises capture the world's attention, while others, despite years of suffering, remain largely overlooked?
I think there is an inherent, I don't know if racism is exactly the right word, but there is a sense of, I've always tried to start by focusing on the stories that nobody else was covering. So it's places like Angola, DR Congo, Central African Republic, places that nobody was really doing stories on. The beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, there were thousands of journalists registered within the first week wanting to be there. There was one journalist working in Central African Republic registered there. So I'm always saying to photographers I mentor, look for the stories that nobody else is talking about. That's where you should be. Unfortunately, we have a sense that there are certain countries, and I see it from people's comments to me, where they'll say things like, yeah, but it's always happening there, or that's their life. It's always like that. There's a sort of sense of their suffering somehow does not equate to my suffering. So if I see, a Black mother and child, maybe their pain is not as my pain is. And that is unfortunately an unconscious bias that we have within us that I try to change. But I think it's also the fault of storytellers and documentary filmmakers and journalists, because so often we try and show the other. By that, I mean trying to show how different we are. Look how strange these people are. Look at the weird things they eat. Look at the strange habits they have. Look at them screaming in the streets. By trying to show stories that I do, which is whether in a mud hut in South Sudan, a tent in Jordan, a flat in South London, I try and say that within those four walls, everything is just the same. That they may be of a different religion, a different color, a different creed, but actually a father just wants his kids to go safely to school each day. A mother just wants her kids to be able to eat. They want their kids to have a better life than they had. The emotions within those four walls are the same everywhere.
As you prepare to receive the Tipperary International Peace Award in September, I suppose, what message do you hope people take from your work and from the stories of those you've spent your life photographing?
I think when I looked at the list of previous winners, I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I think I checked about 3 times to make sure they actually meant that I'd won it. I was kind of going, "Do you mean come to the award, or you want me to?" And they're like, "No, you won the award." But I think that's actually really important, because the point is, 15 years ago, I was working in a bar in Hastings, in a pub, feeling very lost. I'd lost purpose in my life. I lost a way. I had nothing backing me up, so to speak. I had lost everything. Then I go through the whole process of being injured and having to rebuild my life. And I've done this outside of the context. I don't have a political position. I don't have a big organization backing me up. I'm not working for a major newspaper or anything. It's just been me thinking that maybe in some small way I could have an impact that would make the world a little bit better. And so what I would say from this is, at a time when everybody feels very overwhelmed, I think, and I think because of the amount of information we're getting about conflicts, about humanitarian crisis, about politics, everybody is feeling overwhelmed. And when you feel overwhelmed, we tend to do nothing, because we feel I can't have any impact. I learned when I was going through my own recovery, there was a point about 3 months after my injury where I had to look at myself and say, look, from this moment on, don't think about the things you can't do, but focus on what you can each day.
What are your plans, Giles, for the future in terms of your work?
I kind of jokingly say, when people ask me that question, is I'm dreaming of the most boring year of my life, just to sit at home and do cooking. The reason I went back to Afghanistan was a simple belief that maybe my work would mean one child doesn't have to go through what I go through. And that is what keeps me going each day. I have to be careful, because sometimes that can become almost something that pushes me on too hard, that I just can't stop with that feeling. But that being said, I feel more energized, more purpose driven than ever. And my energy seems to come from the very things that other people think you would be exhausted by, which is the travel, but it's the meeting people, it's seeing communities, seeing the impact that our work can have. That energizes me. So at the moment, all I can think about is just carrying on doing what I'm doing. Like I said a minute ago, focus on the things I can control each day. I wish I could stop the wars around the world. I wish I could stop my friends being killed in those wars. I can't. I wish I could do a lot of things. But I know that today I could raise the money to try and get another farm in Rwanda. I could try and find another apartment for a family that's fleeing war in Beirut, or I could get another ambulance on the front line in Ukraine to save lives. And so that's what I do each day, is just wake up and think, what is it I can do today?
Well, listen, it's been an absolute privilege to get the opportunity to speak with you, Giles. Thank you so much for this time, and yeah, best of luck with everything, you know.
Well, and hopefully I'll be in Tipperary in September. So
Yeah, I hope to see you there. Yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be great.
hope to see you then.
Okay, that's great.
All right,
Listen,
absolute
thanks
pleasure,
so much, Giles. See you now.
Thanks a lot. Bye.